Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this talk by Professor Cameron Campbell from the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. He's also right now a fellow at Stanford University, spending this year doing research there in Northern California. So this top event, Professor Campbell will speak on a series of research projects on the theme Qing Officialdom, Insights from Big Historical Data. So as many of you know, Professor Campbell is chair professor in the Division of Social Science at the HKUST. He's also actually a co-PI in this area of excellence project that has received a big research grant of 74 million Hong Kong dollars from the Research Grants Council, which is part of the Hong Kong government. So Professor Campbell is known for his many years of research, doing investigations on various aspects of elites in historical China, especially in the 19th and early 20th centuries. By analyzing historical big data, he will look at changes over time in the social and geographic origins of groups of political and educational elites, their success or failure in navigating such major disruptions as the fall of the Qing dynasty in 1911, and their family background and other influences on the careers of government officials. So his research has focused on demography, stratification, and inequality, especially in historical China and in comparative perspective. So for this work, he and his collaborators construct and analyze large longitudinal and individual level data sets from archival sources. For the last decade, he has focused on studies of both Qing dynasty and Republican era officials and other elites through analysis of their personnel records. So he continues to conduct research on kinship, inequality, and demographic behavior in historical China through the analysis of multi-generational population databases. So he was awarded a Guggenheim Fellowship in 2004 and named a Changjiang Scholar, Changjiang Xuezhe, by the Ministry of Education of the People's Republic of China in 2017. So without further ado, let me, but before I turn it over to Professor Campbell, let me again remind everyone that the format of this webinar. Like before, Professor Campbell as the speaker will talk for 1 hour, to be followed by our great commentator, Professor Zhang Qing from Shanghai Jiaotong University. So Professor Zhang received his PhD in sociology and history from HKUST. So currently he is the Dean of the School of History at Shanghai Jiaotong University, and he has been a great collaborator and contributor to our efforts in promoting quantitative history research in China. So he will, share with us his thoughts with comments for 10 to 15 minutes, to be followed by our usual Q&A session, which will be moderated by my colleague, Dr. Ma Zhichen. And if you have any questions or comments, please post them in the Q&A box. And so at the end, in the end, Dr. Ma will select a few questions for Professor Campbell to address. Okay, without further ado, so Cameron, here you go.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Professor Chen, and also thanks very much to Professors Ma and Chen for giving me this opportunity. And I also look forward to hearing the discussion from Jiang Qing, who actually has already, with James Kong, published in this area. And some of the work that I'll be presenting actually builds or extends on some of the work that they did. So what I'm going to do today is present results from a variety of ongoing studies, which are actually sort of parts of separate manuscripts, and with the goal of revising our way we think about Qing officialdom as a meritocracy. So I'll be sharing results on the distribution of the qualifications of Qing officials, their degree qualifications and so forth, spatial origins, their chances of appointment, conditional on having a degree, their chances of actually being appointed, and then the time to appointment, the dynamics of their careers after their appointment. And then actually, this is where the connection to James Kong and Jiang Qing's work is the role of family background in shaping careers. And what I would like to convince you is that, while in many ways Qing officialdom may have been meritocratic, it was probably not necessarily solely because a subset of officials were selected based on their exam performance. And what I'm going to try to do is convince you that if we want to think in terms of a kind of a meritocratic aspect of Qing officialdom, we have to pay more attention to selection processes in other parts of the process, including things that affected chances of appointment, the chances of promotion or termination, and so forth, that may have been in some ways more important than just simply having an examination degree. And my more general hope is to help illustrate how big historical microdata, especially descriptive results from it, can make contributions that complement those from traditional historical studies, as well as complementing the many ongoing studies that emphasize causal inference, sort of long-term persistence, literature, the effects of shocks, and so forth, basically by revising widely accepted stylized facts and ground truths. So I see the kind of work that I'm presenting today with essentially descriptive findings from microdata as interacting with or in a dialogue with both the work of more traditional historians doing case studies, institutional histories, and so forth, as well as many colleagues in economics and political science that have a more of a focus on causal inference and so forth. These three areas, I think, can all contribute to each other. So what I want to begin by making the case that there's already both what I'll be talking about today and then work by others that suggests that I think our traditional way of thinking about the examination system and, quote, meritocracy in Chinese history as being almost isomorphic or interchangeable concepts is really not a complete understanding. So today I'll be showing you that many officials had qualifications other than exam degrees. Many exam degree holders never were appointed to office or were appointed only after decades of waiting. The geographic origins of officials with purchased and examination degrees were similar and quite stable over time, even though one of them in principle, officials with exam degrees should have been selected on merit, and purchased degrees perhaps other characteristics. That after appointment, yes.
Do you mind sharing your PowerPoint?
Oh yeah. Reach the I mean, you're not missing much yet, but it's just, yeah, let me get the, okay. So I think you can see it now, right? I think, okay. So the, so basically, I'll show you that there were also high exit rates right after appointment, especially in the first year. And then again, connecting to Zhang Qin and James Kong's earlier work that was published in Modern China, the family background actually mattered a lot for, let's say, progress in official careers. And of course, this relates to other work by like my colleague at HKUST, Lawrence Zhang, and his new book where he emphasizes the role that the purchase of office played for appointment and promotion. We also know from work by historians that are working with more traditional sources that, especially in the late 19th century, there were vast numbers of people, local officials, being appointed in an acting capacity for short term, not without necessarily the high level exam degrees. And then there's also a much longer literature critiquing the relevance of the knowledge that was tested on the exams. So I would like to convince you that while the system may have been meritocratic in the sense that people were being selected, and especially retained or promoted or terminated based on their performance, it went well beyond the exams. So I think the basic thing I'm trying to address is what I think is a kind of a limitation in many existing quantitative studies of Qing officialdom, is that, as I mentioned, I think there's a tendency to treat the examination system and having an official career and sort of meritocracy is all sort of interchangeable. I read papers where people have throwaway lines saying that Qing, the Qing bureaucracy was a meritocratic system because all officials were appointed on the basis of having an exam degree and so forth. And so there's a heavy focus on exam attainment. And I think a neglect so far of the roles of degree and office purchase, appointment and promotion and termination. So I'll introduce the data. So the core of the data that I'll be presenting my work on today, or our work actually, is the database that we've constructed from the quarterly editions of the jinshenlu, which now consists of 4.3 million records of about, depending on, I think maybe it's 283,000 officials actually, after we revised some of the linkage procedures between 1760 and actually 1912. And the jinshenlu was a roster of civil and sometimes military officials that was published every 3 months. It was produced originally by the government, but then there was a commercial market for these rosters, especially in the 19th century. Every roster had about 13,000 to 15,000 officials listed. Sometimes there were another 8,000 military officials. One limitation is that at least the official editions produced by the government only record people with, you might say, regular appointments. And so they don't include people who had temporary or irregular or acting appointments. And so for this analysis, we're only going to consider people with regular appointments. In the original, we get name and province and county of origin, qualification, chushan, an exam or purchase degree, and then the location and the title of their position. And then by linkage to auxiliary sources, we can actually get bureaucratic rank and income, exam performance, family background, and then we have some other things underway that add some information on office purchase and so forth. And there's just a couple of sample pages of the jinshenlu here. The data on family backgrounds that I'll mention toward the end of the talk comes from another database that we've been building from Tongnian Shilu. that these were compiled by classes of degree holders who earn their degrees in the same sitting of an exam, either the Xiangshi or the Huishi. And so these will, at least for every official listed, they'll have the name, province, and county of origin, exam rank, and then names, degrees, and positions held by ancestors and kin. And when we get to our analysis of family background, we'll be using the information on father, grandfather, and great-grandfather, which is the most consistently recorded. The jinshenlu, you'll see that many of the figures I present are for the period 1830 to 1911. That's where we have the most consistent recording. For much of that time period, we have nearly every edition, or at least one or two editions per year, with just a few gaps. But I will sometimes present some findings or material from earlier. So this is just an example of the kind of how the transcription process works, which is we have a team of coders who go through these editions and transcribe the information into spreadsheets. You might think 15,000 people every 3 months is sort of unimaginable, but keep in mind that there was only a certain amount of turnover between each edition and the next. So once you get one edition entered, then adding editions is basically editing or revising the previous edition. So this CGED, the jinshenlu, is the core. As I mentioned, it contains information on positions, qualifications, and careers. And then the Tengnian that I mentioned, as well as Xiangshi, actually Jinshi Timinglu from the CGD, the CBDB, as well as an edition that was transcribed by our collaborator Ren Yuxue at Jiaoda, provide exam information. We also have experimented with linking, because many high officials were actually members of the Aixin Juelo, and we've been experimented with linking to the Zongpu of the Aixin Juelo, the UDA, but that's still in progress because linking Manchu names is quite challenging. And then we're actually transcribing the contents of the Li Dangan right now. I think we're probably about halfway through. And when that's done, there's information then on when officials were promoted, who recommended them, for a subset of officials anyway, who recommended them, whether it was based on a purchase or something else. And we're also gathering county and prefectural information that we can link to, the information we have on the county of origin of officials, but I won't be presenting much, only a little bit from that today. I just mentioned that, what's been taking a lot of our time is actually not, the data entry is fairly straightforward, but I think the most, you might say, complex aspect of constructing this data set has been the linkage, but this is what makes a lot of the analysis that I'll show you possible. And you might think, oh, this should be easy because the combination of surname, given name, and province and county of origin was typically unique for serving officials. So you're talking about highly educated men in the Qing dynasty. They have thousands of characters to choose from when they're composing, or they or their parents are composing their given names. So actually names, especially when you combine them with county of origin, tend to be unique. The biggest thing we have to address, or we have addressed, is the inconsistencies across editions and between sources in the way that names were written. Not so much that people changed names after they became officials. Their names seem to be pretty stable in the official sources, but rather characters may be replaced with actually other representations of the same character, like iti-zi, or they're replaced with homonyms, or because these were human beings, actually the commercial presses that were producing these editions of the jinshenlu that we were using, when they were carving the blocks, sometimes they might, somebody's vision might be sloppy or whatever, and they would replace somebody's a character in somebody's name with a character that looked similar, but was actually a completely different character. And so in linkage, if we have too relaxed a criteria to accommodate this kind of inconsistency, we get false positives, and then too strict a criteria leads to false negatives. So we finally, actually, after several years, settled on probabilistic linkage. And then finally, earlier this year in spring 2022, we were finally satisfied with the results of our linkage. And we have a paper that came out a few months ago that discusses this. I want to set this in the context of our sort of larger family of projects. So, I'm part of a sort of a large collective. The Lee Campbell group. We've been working with James Lee, Yang Chen, Chen Shuang, Dong Hao, Shui Qin, Matt Noller, Bija Chen, Ren Yushui, PhD students, and so forth. And everyone, there's sort of a whole family of projects of which this is a part. So I'm talking today about the data that we've collected and entered for the Qing dynasty. But then some of the other members of our group are collecting information from especially from the Republican era, and then also from the PRC. And in the future, actually, we're trying to sort of link between the Qing and the Republican era in terms of, and this is Professor Chen was talking about. We mentioned continuity from the late Qing into the Republican era, but we hope to sort of follow people across the divide, 1911 divide, and figure out who sort of, you might say, successfully navigated the transition and who was less successful. That's underway and not yet ready. Just a picture of our group. It's actually not complete. We don't have room for our master's students and so forth. And I just want to thank all of them for everything we're doing is sort of collaborative. And I should also give a shout out to our data entry team, which has been working with us for years and has made this possible. So I want to move now to the presentation of some results. First, looking at the qualifications of officials to put the exam degree holders in perspective in terms of making it, their sort of role in officialdom a little clearer. And if we look at official, the first thing we can look at is officials by whether or not they were Bannermen, and then further subdividing whether they served in the central government or out in the provinces. And what you can see here is that actually in the capital, the actually overwhelming, very large majority of the officials serving in the capital were actually Bannermen. Now, many of those were sort of clerks, BTA, relatively low rank, but even if you take those out, the kind of ratio of Bannermen to non-Bannermen, probably mostly Han, is fairly high. So right up until the end of the Qing in 1911, you might say the upper reaches of officialdom were, if not dominated by Bannermen, at least sort of balanced between Bannermen and Han. So you had a big chunk of the high officials that were appointed with based on criteria other than exam performance, because they were essentially Bannermen. They had special channels and so forth for appointment and so forth. When you get outside of the central government, that is the yellow and the green here, then overwhelmingly the officials are not Bannermen. If you want to call them Han Chinese, you can do that. And then only a small proportion of the officials outside the central government were actually Bannermen, and then they tended to be the higher officials. So if we look at the qualifications of the non-Banner officials in the central government, then kind of the story is consistent with what we usually would like to think, that these sort of high officials were, or at least the officials in the central government were dominated by people with jinshenlu degrees. That's the, I'm not sure what color that is actually, but and then also a fair number of juren and relatively small numbers of people with either lower degrees or purchase degrees, and then some number of people with missing degrees, and that reflects some problems with the additions. But even if you fix that, it wouldn't change things that much. Now, I think what is probably more of a surprise is that if we look out at the officials outside of the central government, is that even in the middle of the 18th century, if you look at the red, that's the holders of jinshenlu degrees, and they actually account for a reasonable chunk of the officialdom out in the provinces, even in the 1760s, 1770s. And then, especially after 1840 or so, their proportion actually increases fairly steadily over time. And then you also have large numbers of officials, either with Gongsheng degrees, and actually relatively few officials with jinshenlu degrees, and then a sort of kind of declining number with juren. So I think the large share of officials, well, I think there's a tendency to assume that, say, degree purchase was something, and Lawrence Zhang has pointed this out, but whereas people tend to assume that degree purchase was sort of associated with the late years of the Qing, as the state was increasingly sort of desperate. Actually, right, well, in the middle of the 18th century, sort of high point of the Qing, well, there were actually non-trivials of numbers of purchase degree holders serving in outside central government. The other thing I want to talk about quickly, because it's still kind of in progress, but if we look at the geographic origins of officials, what's really striking is that regardless of what kind of degree they had, this is looking at the distribution of prefectures of origin for officials. So it's not the rate at which people became officials, but rather it's just the distribution of officials, is that the distributions of officials by prefecture of origin are sort of nearly identical for holders of exam and purchase degrees. Even though you might have expected, well, exam degrees should be kind of based on, picking people with merit, then purchase degrees should have been more, concentrated in areas that we think of as wealthy, but actually there's very high consistency between them. So it, in some ways suggests there wasn't really a big bifurcation between the holders of exam and purchase degrees in terms of where they were coming from. The other sort of striking feature of the when we look at prefectures of origin was that it actually was across a very, you might say, tumultuous time in Qing history. The distributions of prefecture of origin were fairly stable. So we divided, things are, as you might imagine, from 1850 to 1864, they're a little, messy because, there were new officials being appointed from some of the places affected by the Taiping, so I exclude them. But you basically see a strong continuity over a century in terms of not just the provinces where people were coming from, but actually within those provinces, the prefectures. So there's great stability in terms of where people were coming from. I think since everybody sort of asks about this, I just decided to include it. And also I think if you're looking at one big change over time in the composition of officials by place of origin, the one that everyone is probably aware of and is not going to be a surprise to many people is, of course, after 1864 and even during the Taiping, the increase in the share of high officials, 一品、二品、三品、四品 who came from Hunan, so the sort of the Xiangjun, and then also actually a corresponding increase in the number coming from Anhui. So, when we're looking at these changes over time, that's really the big, you might say, big changes really only apparent in the geographic origins of the highest officials, and not so apparent for other officials. Now, I mentioned that there was actually, sort of having an exam degree didn't mean that you would be appointed. So we have some through record linkage, some evidence on the sort of people's chances of being appointed or proceeding to the next stage of the examination system. So from linkage to the jinshenlu, the timinglu, and then the jinshenlu, we can work out the sort of conditional on being awarded the Juren degree, the cumulative sort of probability of either proceeding to the Jinshu degree, the probability of proceeding to the Jinshu degree and then getting appointed, and then the probability of being appointed solely on the basis of a Juren degree. So, something like 13% of Juren eventually go on to get a Jinshu degree. That's not a surprise. I think James Kongs and Jiang Qin found that. That's, I think it's almost arithmetic, or based on the numbers of slots and so forth available every year. And then most of those people who went on to get a Jinshu actually had an appointment. So you can compare this green line with the yellow line. I think what's more striking and comes as a surprise to a lot of people was that for the people that never progressed to the Jinshu degree and then essentially got in the queue for appointment on the basis of a Juren degree, the wait for an appointment was really long. So something like maybe 30% of Juren would eventually get appointed even without a Jinshu degree, but you had to go all the way out to 30 years past the award of the degree to get up to that 30% level or 1/3 level. And so you had many people, many Juren that were still being appointed after 10, 15, 20 years after earning their degree. So there was sort of an interminable wait, even if you had the Juren degree, to actually be appointed. Very few Juren were appointed right away. I mean, obviously they would try maybe to sit for the Jinshu first, or sit for the Huishi first, but and then if that failed, they would get in a queue for appointment. But this was a very long queue, and obviously it didn't actually clear. So they were looking at a lot of people that were spending a lot of time and effort preparing for the Xiangshi, hoping to get the Juren, and then even if they got it, there was only a limited chance of actually ever being appointed. So things work better for the holders of the Jinshu degree, where basically, and it's exactly the way you would expect, right? The Erjia people were overwhelmingly likely to be appointed, and most of them were appointed within in short, fairly soon after the after being awarded the Jinshu. When you get all the way down to the Sanjia, the third tier, and then you're looking at the people that were ranked, 100 or lower, then it took longer for them to be appointed. But even then, a majority of them eventually were appointed. One striking feature is that, because we can also, from the Tongyang Shilu, we can get ages, is that because of this incredible delay for people with a Juren degree who were in the queue for appointment, the delay in terms of them actually being appointed, when Juren were appointed, they were typically older than the Jinshu. So the jinshenlu, because they were appointed, they essentially got the degree and then they were appointed fairly quickly, were actually tended to be younger than the Jiren in other parts of the bureaucracy. So another surprise, thing that's been sort of surprising to a lot of people is the level of turnover, especially in the very first year. So here we're just calculating for people. I'm not presenting information on the Banner officials because they're sort of very different kind of set of circumstances. But if you look at the very first year of appointment, something like 80 per 1,000 officials would actually exit within the next 3 months. And so what that meant was that overall, nearly 30%, 28.7% of newly appointed officials on average would actually exit within the first 12 months of their appointment. After that, the exit rates actually stable. They fell, and then they were actually quite stable for quite a while. So if you made it through your first year, sort of things were a lot better. But there were some early studies based on samples of people collected from gazetteers, which looked at the appointment lengths of local officials. Even a study done back in 1974 by some historians at I think at the Zhongyanyu in Taipei, which suggested that at least the local officials had much shorter kind of appointments than we tended to expect. But this is showing that this is sort of a general feature of the system. And again, this is already excluding everybody that had an irregular appointment or a acting appointment or some other kind of you might say irregular, unusual appointment. And we're looking at people with regular appointments. So I think this is something that needs further examination, is what's going on in the first few years. As a result of these sort of dynamics, one thing you can work out from these exit rates is that actually they were high enough that if you do the math, sort of almost like demographic calculations, it basically shows that for the non-Banner officials, half of them turned over every 4 years or so. So there's a lot of turnover or churning in the system. And then if you then look at the sort of expected career lengths based on these dynamics, what you see is that if people, the conditional upon completing their first year of service, officials had a longer expected number of additional years of service than after their sort of first year than they did at year 0. So there's again a lot going on in the first year, and then there's additional kind of exit processes later. So finally, I want to get to in some ways one of the more important parts of the talk, where I'm presenting the results on sort of family background, exam performance, and employment, where this is the literature on family background and elite attainment, of course, goes back to classic work by Hu Bingdi and others. Hu Bingdi, quite remarkable, working at the time that he was working, sort of manually calculated that just looking at the family backgrounds within the last 3 generations of degree holders, that during the Qing, sort of 1/3 of degree holders were new blood, and then the higher proportions of new blood, in the sense of not having anyone with a status in the last 3 generations, was higher for people with lower degrees. And then there have been other studies in this vein, but I'm just mentioning some of the more recent or influential ones. Jiang Qing and James Kong used data on Juren from the Zhuzhen, and showed that performance on the provincial exam predicted success on the metropolitan exam, and that father's official position also predicted success on the metropolitan exam. And there's a lot more going on in the paper, and just obviously don't have time to summarize it in too much detail. And then actually Huang Yifei, he was a Caltech PhD who wrote his dissertation examining the outcomes of Juren in Jiangnan in the 19th century based on a data set that he constructed and actually very generously shared with us, which we absorbed into our database. But he showed something similar. He was actually the first person to link ancestry to the chances of attaining high office, and he showed that men whose paternal ancestors held office were more likely to hold office. But he was working with a sample restricted to Jiangnan, and it was sort of selective in terms of the time period. And of course, we can do this at a national level. And then because we have the complete career histories, what we can do is we can actually estimate total official as an outcome measure for kind of family background influences. We can look at the officials' estimated total official income over the course of their career by basically taking the Pinji of their rank every 3 months and then translating that into a kind of an official salary, and then integrating that over the length of their career. So we get that as a outcome measure, to measure sort of family background influences. But some of the other things we looked at, actually inspired by Jiang Qing and James Kong's paper, what we actually do is a sort of composite measure of family background. We actually regress the age at the time of degree for Juren, and then because we found, and I think Jiang Qing and James Kong originally pointed this out, that sort of the family background seemed to have a very strong effect on age at earning the degree, that people with a more privileged background would earn the degree earlier. So we actually use, after this regression, we use the predicted age at time of degree as a sort of composite measure of family background. I'll tell you what's in the regression in just a bit. We also look at the exam performance of Juren as a function then of family background, and then whether or not they were ever appointed to an official position, and then their official income over the course of their career. And so when we're measuring family background, we collect, actually following, I think, James Kong and Jiang Qing and Huang Yifei and others, and in fact, go back 3 generations and count the numbers of degrees in the patrilineal line. Well, the numbers, then a separate measure of purchase degrees in the last 3 generations, and then by linkage to the earlier editions of jinshenlu, the highest rank obtained for the father, actually the position held by the father at the time the candidate sat for the exam, and then their father's position at the time the candidate was first appointed, as well as some other controls. And what we find when we do this is that essentially, as expected, is that family background had a very strong effect on the age at which people earn the Juren degree. So again, based on these results, rather than having all these different kind of separate measures of family background, in each regression, we take predicted age at earning the Juren as a kind of right-hand side measure, as a sort of composite or synthetic measure of family background, where you see sort of, just as an example, that the if the father held a position at the time that the candidate sat for the exam, they on average passed about 2 years earlier or 2 years younger. Also, strong effects of having a jiren in the last 3 generations or a jinshu in the last 3 generations and so forth. So when we then look at the family background effects and other effects on outcomes of interest, what we actually see, probably the most important one, is that now for the effects of the predicted age at obtaining the jiren, you need to flip the signs because younger people were, you might say, a younger age was associated with greater privilege and so forth. So basically, if your predicted age based on your family background at obtaining the jiren was younger, then or maybe the way to think about it, if your predicted age was older, if you were appointed on the basis of your jiren without going on to get a jinshu degree, you actually had a lower lifetime income. You were less likely to be appointed, and then if you were appointed, your income was lower. And then also, if your predicted age at earning the jiren was higher, then your chance of going on to the jinshu degree were lower. But of course, we can also use as a wealth measure, the person's own purchase degree, whether they have that, and the signs are generally in the direction that you would expect. And then we actually have the actual age at the time of earning the jiren. And again, if you were older when you earned the jiren, your outcomes were less favorable. But that's consistent, of course, with if you think that actually the actual age at which you earned the jiren was a measure of ability, then that's sort of consistent with her story. So I'll move on to jinshu in just a second and then wrap up. But what we can actually show descriptively is that if we work out the decile of the predicted age at earning the jiren degree, and then with the blue and red lines, we can look at the actual observed either chances of being appointed or the chances of going on to the jinshu with the red line. What's very clear is that people were sort of in the bottom 50% in terms of their, or you might say top, the older people, the people with older ages, their chances of, again, this is the predicted, not the predicted age at earning the jiren, they were actually much less likely to proceed to the jinshu, and they were generally less likely to be appointed. So if we do something similar when we look at jinshu and then their outcomes, but instead of using age at the obtaining the jinshu as a measure of family background or predicted age, we actually come up with a continuous sort of score from the ordinal logit predicting their exam category, where that's something where there's a strong effect of family background. And then we use that continuous variable as, again, a composite measure of family background. And then look at some outcomes, including the chances of appointment, and then for those who were appointed, their total income. And so your sort of predicted exam performance actually has a strong positive chance or effect on your chances of appointment. And then conditional on appointment actually also affects then your sort of, it's actually logged lifetime income. And then, the other results are sort of as you would expect, that people that finish the jinshu earn the jinshu earlier, or, well, you might say if they earned it later, they were less likely to be appointed and their lifetime income was lower. And then Obviously, their exam performance predicted both their chances of appointment and their chances, their income after appointment. So what this all means is that, this persistent effect of family background kind of on the composite measures of careers, that is, sort of income integrated over the length of the career, is that one way of, getting some kind of understanding of the implications of this is that here, if we, this is actually not a simulation, this is straight from the data, where we sort of sort officials according, again, to their actual, well, their, what should have been their official income as, predicted from the salary tables. If we sort them into quartiles and, again, integrating their income over their careers, what you basically see is that as you move from the bottom quartile up to the top quartile in terms of the lifetime income, official income of officials, which is sort of a composite measure of both their rank and the length of their career, is the share of officials who had a ancestor in the last 3 generations rose from 7% to 14%, basically doubled. And then say if you work your way down, and if you look at the share who had a jinshenlu or higher in the last 3 generations, the bottom quartile in terms for income of officials, about half of these people had a jinshenlu or higher in the last 3 generations. But when you get up to the 4th quartile, it's nearly 2/3. So it's sort of fairly clear that that the family background continued to have sort of strong effects on people's careers, even both from the previous results and this results, even after controlling for their exam performance. That people with advantageous family backgrounds had sort of longer careers, well, either longer careers or reached higher rank, or some combination of the two. So what I'd like to conclude with this by reminding you that, so I think we've hope I've convinced you that the system was a lot more complicated than the assertion that it was a sort of a meritocratic system where officials were appointed based on the fact that they had an exam degree. First, if we look at just the composition of officials, we saw that officials with exam degrees were just one part of the system. Actually, many officials were Bannermen or held purchase degrees. Many officials many holders of exam degrees were never appointed. That was especially the case for the Juren, who never proceeded to the jinshenlu degree. They had to wait for years or decades to be appointed. And then conditional on actually exam performance, which in theory, is supposed to measure ability, family background, both for Juren, who went on to an appointment, and for jinshenlu, who went on to an appointment, influenced their their chances of appointment, and then their salaries or lifetime income after appointment. And so we also see that there was a lot of, you might say, churning in the system, where there was opportunity for other selection processes to operate that I don't think we still need to work on. So these very high departure rates in the first year, I think require a lot of further examination. Generally, high turnover in the system. So this was not a system made up of people that essentially, once they had an exam degree, got an appointment, which was like a sinecure. A lot of people, left, and so the sort of half, if you work out the math, half of officials were sort of replaced or turned over every 4 years. So I think future directions, I'd like to suggest that assessing whether or not the system was meritocratic, and in some sense, our understanding of the system is, meritocratic, has to move beyond the current focus on obtaining an exam degree. I think again, I see these papers in quantitative papers in sociology, political science, or economics, which sort of as a throwaway line will claim that appointment was in the successive dynasties was meritocratic because all officials were appointed based on the fact that they had an exam degree. I see this also in papers on contemporary China, where people are trying to explain, for example, the people's willingness to invest in education. They throw away these have these throwaway lines about the exclusive role of exams in appointment of officials, and I think it's fairly clear that at least for the Qing is just not the case, and we have to think about in terms of thinking about whether or not the system was meritocratic or how meritocratic the system was we have to think about kind of stages after obtaining the degree, who was appointed, and then what their subsequent careers looked like, who got fired, who got promoted, and so forth. And then I think, again, I'm heavily influenced by Lawrence's thinking and conversations with him, is that we sort of also need to think about, rethink what we even mean about when we say meritocratic. There's a commonly made distinction between ability and family background that may not really even be appropriate. Academic ability as reflected, I mean, this is one criticism of the exams even during the Qing, I mean, which is why they were abolished, is that academic ability as reflected on the exams may not have been relevant to success as an administrator. I keep thinking that if academic performance was a great predictor of success of an administrator, I think universities would be a lot better run than they actually are. But we don't really expect this correlation to hold for universities, so I don't know why it should hold for the Qing. That there were a lot of other things that would shape people's success or failure as an administrator, and quite possibly important skills relevant to success as an administrator may have been acquired as sort of cultural capital, that it's an old family background, and as Lawrence has, I think, pointed out, in some ways is a form of ability that coming from a certain family, you would understand how to perform in a real world situation. So I think reflecting on this, I think we need to move beyond the assumption that the exam degrees and then official careers is broader. I think reflection is that we tend to we conceptualize kind of society as this sort of giant tournament where everyone who could participated in the examination system as soon as they had the wherewithal to educate their sons, and that it was a sort of a tiered tournament with only one, I'd say, goal, which was an official career. And this is going beyond findings. This is more my own thinking, but that this idea that the examinations were this tournament in which everyone, as soon as they had the means, competed. I think it ignores the it assumes a sort of great deal of uniformity in people's goals, and it ignores a lot of heterogeneity in terms of heterogeneity in terms of family motivations and strategies, in terms of why they would prepare a son for the exam, or what they hope for from having a son who had an official career. Certainly, looking at the high proportions of jurin that were never appointed, the relatively large number of people that sort of had a very short official career that maybe ended in the first year or just a few years after that, it certainly raises questions about why, given the expense required to prepare a son, for the exam, it doesn't seem like a rational calculation given the high failure rate. So presumably people had other motives in mind beyond simply a mindless pursuit of status, and we should be, thinking about what, for families, what other things were they trying to do when they were preparing a son for the exams and so forth. And then we can eventually, this is more speculative, even move away from the idea that at some level, anything that increased your chances of success on the exam was a sign of advantage, that it's entirely possible that there were pools of families out there that actually weren't competing in the same tournament in the sense that they all wanted their son, hope that their son would progress to the jinshenlu and then become a high official. And there are probably families out there that were happy for whatever reasons they had if one of their sons was even just had a juren degree and a very brief service career as an official. So I think that's all, and I think I'm actually a couple minutes early, which is unusual for me. And so I'll leave this slide up, but I'll close it. But the other thing I want to remind everyone is that we've actually already made extracts from the CGED-Q available. You can download them at a variety of sites at Harvard, HKUST, and DOT. And I encourage you to, I hope you'll all download the data and that we've already released and write papers with it. And then I think that's it. So thanks very much for giving me this opportunity to share our results with you. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, Professor Campbell, for the very fascinating talk. So now it's our discussion session. We are very happy to have Professor Jiang Qing, Professor of History from Shanghai Jiao Tong University. Professor Jiang will give about 15 minutes discussion. For the audience, please feel free to leave your questions in our Q&A box. We will tend to address your questions after Professor Jiang's discussion. Okay.
Okay. Thanks very much for Professor Chen Zhu and Chi Chen inviting me to be here. And thanks a lot for Professor Campbell for the fascinating lecture. I just remember 10 years ago when I was doing my PhD dissertation, Professor Campbell still in UCLA, so he became my committee member of my defense committee. So for the past 10 years, Professor Campbell and Professor James Lee have carried out such a big and fascinating project on the Qing officialdom with millions of their career records. So I'm very glad to hear the latest progress made by Professor Campbell presented here. So I think I don't need 15 minutes. I will be quite, I will give my some thoughts on the whole project, and I think we can discuss in the later periods. I will share my, can I share? Okay. I have a very brief PPT. Can you see? Yeah. I think the whole presentation can fall into two parts. The first part is Professor Campbell show us how they using the big data, the bigger Qing official data, to give us a more comprehensive framework for the Qing officialdom, and also shared with us some new knowledge for this field, for the education level, and also how the purchase degree is important for the for the whole Qing officialdom. And also ethnicity, Han and Banner differential are also one important topic. And Professor James Lee's group have done a lot of research on the Northeast China and Qing China, and they have the advantage in dealing with such ethnicity Qing Banner group. So they also showed us here for the geographic origin. Professor Campbell showed very quick, but this is also very important topic for 历史地理学 historical geography in China for in the history discipline. It is very important. So that is why Renmin University, the Hu Heng write some papers on how the prefectures, zhifu, they are distributed geographically. So this is the three important facts that education, ethnicity, and the geographic origin that the big data, the jinshenlu data can show us and can tell us what with the jinshenlu data has very limited variables, that is education, ethnicity, and their hometown, home province and home county. So with this big data, I think Professor Campbell show us some new knowledge if we don't have such data. So for the data set itself, they can show us how the selection progress and how the turnover rate is in the county level, because Li Guoqi in Taiwan, they have done such data and analysis based on local gazettees, but using the more comprehensive and more detailed records of the jinshenlu, I think Professor Campbell show us more solid information on this way. So, and also the career length and their determinants or advancement can also be analyzed. I think the big advantage of the Lee and Campbell group, they have the long-term, they have focus on the long-term continuity and change compared to ROC and PRC. So that is a very great contribution of this research group, I think. For the second part of today's lecture, I think Professor Campbell gave us not just descriptive, but also an analytic and interdisciplinary work on. And this is the most the part I'm most interested in. And I think last time I listened to Professor Campbell's lecture was in 2008 in Hong Kong, the annual conference of economic history of Asia, and they haven't done the data matching part, but today he showed us their group have matched with the family background materials in the exam papers, and also have income data. I'm sorry, I missed how the income data was constructed, but I think Campbell can, Professor Campbell can discuss more in the discussion part, and I think a lot of our audience are also interested in the income data. And for the, I think that although we have already seen that Professor Campbell matched with the family background and the income, but for local gazettees and the genealogies still can be added if available, or doing some case studies like one province or one prefecture or one county. Because when I supervise one master student, I'm currently supervising a student. He is doing a research in the 1820s, one magistrated progress. So the local gazettees, the records in the local gazettees are a little bit different from the jinshenlu. And so if we are treating the jinshenlu as a dictionary, we still need some detailed localized data to double check the accuracy. But that is already very important for all the historians who are doing local research on local governance and social mobility. So thank you very much for sharing with us the latest research. For potential research we can do, because I'm trained as a sociologist and an economic historian, but I'm doing research in the Department of History in Shanghai Jiao Tong University. So I listened to my friends of historians, and they will have more concern on how the patterns Professor Campbell showed us, how the Qing officials, the patterns of the Qing officials, like how education titles are distributed, how the ethnicities influence their career advancement, how the geographic origin have their importance. So I think for the first part, after we know the patterns, we can also collaborate with historians to study institutionally how these patterns are formed. That is one way to extend our influence in the field of history, Chinese history. For the second topic, I'm also interested because I think local governance is a hot and classic topic, but after Li Guoqi's research, we haven't seen very solid data-based research on this. But we have already the whole name list, and if we can find more data on the local gazettees or the officials' records, like Tongguanlu, which I treated in my second essay of my PhD dissertation, if Professor Campbell also remembers that, Tongguanlu, because like this local governance topic is highly appreciated by also some historians doing political science background. They are also very interested in such, and the sociologists. If we can do more in the data matching process part, I think we can have more influence on all the social science discipline. Oh, that is my discussion, all my comments and suggestions. Thanks again for Professor Campbell for the fantastic lecture.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Zhang. Professor Campbell, would you like to give some response to Professor Zhang's comments?
Yeah, first is I should clarify on the income. Yes, unfortunately, we don't have the actual reported, incomes of individual officials. What we do have is, we have their positions, and then we can map those positions to Pinji. And then there were sort of standard salary tables, which, I mean, it'd be like the, sort of standard US government salary for a GS, grade. So these are sort of estimated, where we're taking the, you might say, recommended official salary for people at different Pinji. I think it's in the Huidian. And then we sort of integrate that over the, that if there were a Sanpin or Wupin or whatever, we plug in the expected salary and then sort of integrate that. I think I just want to, I don't really have anything to, I guess, well, one thing I can, I think, on your seems like interacting with historians, I think in fact that's important. And that's one of the, that I had that little figure with the 3 circles up at the beginning of the talk, talking about sort of traditional historians kind of, you might say, in a dialogue both with us and then with the people working in the more sort of econometric approaches. But yeah, I think there's a lot of room for, on the one hand, we can take sort of claims that have been made by, say, historians doing local studies or sort of case studies based on, maybe where they've made generalizations. They've done a sort of case study of a county in Sichuan, but then said, look, here's this thing we think was true in general. And obviously, there's some of those claims we can assess. And then, as you suggest, I think there's a lot in here that in turn we need, in terms of, there's all sorts of calculations we've done where, at some level where they're sort of puzzling some of the results. I think the, this high turnover in the first year, which I think is consistent with, what Li Guoqi and his collaborator in that 1974 paper, mentioned for, local officials, but, it seems to be a sort of a general, phenomenon. And I think we need more interaction with traditional historians. I think and this is just sharing a kind of reflection, and because we've been working with more traditional historians, is we sort of have to work towards a kind of a mutual understanding of sort of how we think about data and then how they think about data, right? Where I think a more traditional historian has the sort of the Lawrence Zhang kind of attitude of meticulous attention to specific details and so forth, and then we're taking data and using it like social scientists, where we know that in any particular record or particular person, yes, there's probably problems, and so we'll never have perfect data. We don't, even contemporary questionnaires are not really perfect, right? People don't report their income properly, and so we, rather than discarding it, we try to figure out where the biases are, where the omissions are, and then we try to account for that. That even if any individual record is sort of problematic, when you aggregate, things average out, or there's systematic biases that we can account for. And I think as quantitative researchers, we need to do more in terms of, I think, a dialogue with more traditional historians to bring them along and help them understand kind of the way we think about data, how we think about biases and errors and so forth. So thanks very much, though. Yeah.
Okay, thank you both. Now let's turn to take a look at the questions from our audience today. The first question is from Jinshenlu. I guess this is Jinshenlu from Warwick. So can the increase of purchased appointments be the reason for the long wait for Juren to be appointed?
Well, that's actually a really good question, and I should do that tonight or tomorrow to see if there was a time trend. I think the gap is so long that it can't be entirely driven by, say, some phenomenon of the late 19th century with the rise in the numbers of purchased degrees. Also, it's worth, it's obviously it's something we have to look at in terms of the trends over time. So that's sort of on our plate. What's been striking is we keep digging into time trends and thinking that there should be these big breaks and big, because so much happened in the 19th century and things actually are remarkably stable. But certainly that's something we can check. I have this idea that at some early stage with a smaller subset of the data, we did this and they look fairly stable, but we haven't gone back with the complete data yet.
Okay, thanks. The next question is from Shuren Zheng. Does the dataset contain the information of the career path of a single official after he gets appointed? I guess the answer is yes, right?
Well, yeah, but not. It's I sort of rushed through it, but the key is that by its because these are you have these editions every 3 months, and by themselves, they don't sort of range themselves into a complete career history. So kind of what we have to do is, okay, we have this edition for 1840 spring, 1840 summer, etc. We have to write the code to figure out this, match this record for Kangwan Lin in 1840 spring to Kang Wen-lin in 1840 summer and so forth. And then that turns out, again, I rushed through it, but that turns out to be quite tricky because of the inconsistencies in the recording of characters. And then for one of the reasons I don't push too much on the Qiren is that matching, because they don't have surnames and then they don't have province of origin, they just have their qi fen, right? So linking the Manchus is quite difficult, or the Qiren is quite difficult. Now we are creating a database from the Lü Di Dangan, which that'll be an actual career history up to the point where the person wrote down their resume. So, but thanks very much for that question. And then I think we fixed the QR. We shared the link, right? So we're all set.
Yeah. So many friends and colleagues began to download your data. Yeah. So now let's skip to the question from Avril Carton. The question is about why there's such a focus on the examination system. I recall the Prussia Civil Service has positions where they choose those with a lack of family connect for certain positions in order for the central government to wrest control from certain families. Were there certain positions that were near exclusively held by examination officials with few family connections?
That's actually really interesting. One direction we would like to go is comparative studies of other, bureaucracies, and certainly maybe Avril, if you have more references from the Russian civil service, I'd love to see them, because we are trying to do more comparative studies. So in terms of why there's a focus on the examination system, it is an important part of the system. I don't want to deny that. And there were other dynasties where it was probably much more central to the recruitment of officials than during the Qing. But it was a sort of a central feature of you might say ideology as well. The idea that that was a way of promoting the exam system as a way that sort of at least everyone who could afford an education had a shot at becoming an official. Was a sort of a way of integrating different segments of society, that convincing people that okay, maybe they were poor now, but if they had a really talented son, he could study hard and then become an official. So there was this, and so objectively it was important. I'm not trying to say it was not important, but rather that it was more complicated than we usually think. And then it, of course, was picked up by Weber, and then sort of oversees this notion of kind of China as this rational, ideal type bureaucracy, became very influential, actually even before Weber. So, a lot of countries reformed their civil service to introduce exam systems in the 19th century on the Chinese model. And then since then, people have kind of attached a cultural dimension to this as well. They talk about the achievement of, say, Chinese Americans in the United States, academic achievement, as reflecting kind of this, legacy of the examination system. So there's all sorts of reasons to pay attention to it, but I think the key is to realize that there was a broader context. In terms of, your second question, which is actually quite interesting, there was something related to what I'm sorry, many of the people from China will already know, about this, but there was something related where there was a system called Huibi, according to were forbidden from serving near their hometowns. I think it was within 500 li. I know Yushui has worked on this, and so precisely because they didn't want officials to be wuliao and local elites that befriend them and things like that. So there was something analogous. In terms of preventing, you might say, the formation of networks, talking about high-level officials with examination degrees, even if they didn't form networks based on kinship, because becoming a high-level official was a rare event. One of the recurring problems, and Lawrence has certainly talked about this, and other people have talked about this at length, is that exam classes tended to form cliques. So say all of the people who were in the jinshenlu in the same year would tend to think of themselves as kind of a band of classmates, and they would actually form a network within government and look after each other's interests, which actually frustrated the emperors. That I think Lawrence has pointed this out, that I think even Qianlong, there were people calling for the abolition of degree purchase or office purchase, and various emperors found it useful to keep that, because it was actually the purchasers, the degree purchasers, the office purchasers, tended to be much more atomized and less likely to form cliques. And so they were actually much easier for the emperor to control. But it's a really fascinating topic on that to follow up.
Okay, thanks. So for time limits, I have to skip some questions. So for questions from Ross Corner, Chen Nan Cho, and Xinhong Huang, I'm sorry, I will skip your question, but I will forward your question to Professor Campbell for his answer. So let's take a look at Professor David Mitch's question. Can you see more, or at least speculate on whether the higher turnover rate in the first year for officials reflects failure and being pushed out versus leaving for better opportunities outside the civil service? Also, were there non-official sources of income for civil servants outside of the salary scale, what I suppose could be viewed as corruption opportunities?
Okay, that's actually a great question. The first part is kind of where I was trying to go in my very last slide, that we have to think about, given that, many people were never appointed, many people who were appointed, they only lasted for 3 years. On the surface, it seems like almost like a waste of money, right? Because your son, a waste of money and time to spend 30 years preparing for an exam and then never, pass it and never get appointed, and then or just work for a year or two. And I think we do have to think more carefully about, whether be open to the idea that in fact, this was not some tournament in which everybody was kind of struggling to climb the rungs to become, the prime minister or something like that. But, different families, I suspect you're right, that different families may have wanted, they may have looked at just simply having somebody in their kin group having an exam degree already as because once people had an examination degree, they had a network, with their classmates. And then if they actually served for a few years again, it was even if they quit after 3 years, they had a sort of cachet as a former official. They had to, if you read I forgot the name of the book, but even, sort of people that had some prior status. I mean, it's like people that, work in the White House for 2 years or something like that, and then they sort of take advantage of it for the next 30 years. And so, like with a job at a think tank or something like that. So I think you're right in that, there were probably people had other motivations, and, there were probably all sorts of reasons that even, getting a degree and then working for 2 or 3 years, we might view it as kind of a bust. But, for many people, I suspect, I mean, or at least we have to research this. Maybe, maybe that's all they wanted, right? Is the degree and a little bit of a resume. Non-official sources of income, yes, and that's a whole other world. Unfortunately, we don't have, for obvious reasons, people didn't tend to write that down and leave account books. Maybe there are account books, but it's actually more complicated than just saying it's corruption, because every, say, magistrate, they had personal staff. I think typically referred to as kind of muliao, or I think that that in terms of, like, say, in a county, there were only 3 or 4 positions that were actually formally part of the bureaucracy, in the sense of being kind of having a appearing in the jinshenlu, but these are counties of hundreds of thousands of people. And then there would be this yamen, which, was sort of doing all the day-to-day work for the people there. And typically a magistrate would have to pay these people out of their own purse. And so sometimes there's some subventions from the central government, but one reason people had to take bribes or have gray income was simply to the basic day-to-day running their office. So it's a sort of a more complicated matter, I think. So I think and then maybe we can, I don't know if we have time for another question or we
Okay, fine, thanks. So finally, Zhiwen Wang raised the 3 questions, but I would only pick the third one. I think many people care about this. May I ask your team's plan to make CGED-Q data in other years public available?
Yeah, so we're going to release it in chunks every 2 years. Eventually, we will release all of it. So I think right now our planning is for the next chunk to be kind of basically the 18th century, sort of everything up to 1800. And then we'll fill in the gaps. Partly reflects our own limitations that, we get money for research, but we don't get much money to actually, we would like to prepare more documentation and so forth. And we haven't even written up or documented really the 1850 to 1864 yet. But we will release all of it. And we hope, but in the meantime, I think, for all I know, there's people in the audience that have already done this, but we can also use extracts for people with specific questions. And this goes back to what I think it was Jiangqin was talking about. So we're especially interested in, if people have, like, say, other local data from a gazetteer, and saying they want to match the names in the gazetteers to the names in the jinshenlu, or they want to link to a genealogy. And so you come to us and say, well, I have the Wang family genealogy from Huizhou or something like that. We can do an extract of everyone's surname Wang, and so we're very open, and we've done this already with variety of people. So if you have a specific request, especially where you can sort of bring something to the table in terms of matching with other data, we'd really be interested in that.
Thank you so much. So we are running out of time, and Professor Zhu Chen is waiting. So let's invite him to give us a concluding remark.
Oh, thank you. So I don't want to say too much. We're out of time already. I just want to make 2 quick comments. One is just as Professor Campbell has made clear, this database they have been collecting will be of great value to the whole research community. Our quantitative history AOE project will provide additional funding for making this database more user-friendly and available to others. So stay tuned. We should make this available at some point, maybe next year or in 2 years' time, depending on how smoothly the AOE project will go. I mean, many of us can make use of this database to address many research questions, especially with this coverage by the database of more than 240,000 officials from the Qing Dynasty period. I mean, that data, that extent of coverage is really the first of its kind, because there are other databases available, but like CBDD, but the coverage even of the Qing Dynasty period is not even close to the level Professor Campbell's new database can provide. And then just also another quick point, the translation of the Chinese official selection process, the exam is usually in English referred to as the civil service exam. But every time when I see this English term, I know English speaking people will take this exam very lightly, as opposed to the in the Chinese world. This is really a selection process of very, very high level senior officials who hold a lot of power on people's lives and resources, many, many other things. Because when you read the term civil service, you just think, those bureaucrats working, year after year, trying to answer to some very senior officials above them. But in reality, in the Chinese case, no. If you get jinshenlu and they get appointed, you're not just like, you would not be an average bureaucrat. Rather, you'd have so much power. This is why so many people spend their whole life trying to prepare for this exam year after year after year after year, because it's just so much power waiting at the end of the tunnel if he would actually succeed. Anyway, I know this is something somebody many years ago made this mistake by calling the Keju as a civil service examination. I mean, which is such an understatement of the actual seriousness and actual weight that the Chinese people were assigning to this whole process. So thank you, Cameron, for the great overview of your database and also highlighting the usefulness of the database with some examples. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you again for your contribution, and thank you all the audience. Our next webinar will be scheduled in next week. Okay, please just explore our website, WeChat, and the YouTube channel. Okay, we look forward to see you soon. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jianqing. Yeah.
Okay. Bye, everyone.
Bye, Cameron.
Bye.
Good night.